Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, AI for Requirements, Modernizing the Department of War's Requirements Process. I'm Dr. Arun Serafin, Executive Director of NDIA's Emerging Technologies Institute. For those of you who don't know, ETI produces research and educational products that focus on defense technology modernization and innovation, like this webinar. Today, we'll be hearing from a panel of experts about how the use of artificial intelligence can change the way the Pentagon generates requirements, including potentially reducing the workload on staff, improving the quality of analysis, and maybe even the quality of the actual requirements. We're also going to look at some of the potential technical, cultural, and policy barriers to the adoption of these technologies. This webinar builds on previous ETI and MITRE efforts on looking at how AI can support the acquisition workforce. For example, last October, we co-organized a one-day symposium held at MITRE's facility in McLean, Virginia, and subsequently released a paper that can be found on ETI's website. We'll drop a link to that paper into the meeting chat here. It's a great pleasure always for us to work with NDIA members, including our member organization, MITRE. And with that, I'd like to introduce Steve Rowe, Managing Director at MITRE, who's going to provide our opening remarks. Steve, thanks for joining us.
All right, thank you, Arun. Hello, my name's Steve Rowe, Managing Director at MITRE Corporation. I'm thrilled to welcome you to this new joint webinar series between MITRE and the National Defense Industrial Association focused on leveraging artificial intelligence in federal acquisition. As we all know, the federal acquisition process is critical to delivering the capabilities our nation depends on, but it's also complex, spanning requirements development, contracting, evaluation, and sustainment. AI has the potential to transform how we navigate that complexity, accelerating decision-making, improving accuracy, and helping us deliver mission outcomes faster and smarter. This webinar series is about moving from concept to capability. MITRE and NDIA are bringing together thought leaders, acquisition professionals, technologists, and policymakers to explore how AI can responsibly and effectively integrate across the acquisition lifecycle, with each webinar focusing on a different part of the acquisition lifecycle. We'll dive into real use cases, emerging tools, and lessons learned from across the government and industry. Our goal is to not only showcase innovation, but also discuss how we can build trust, transparency, and human oversight into every AI-enabled acquisition activity. Our first session today focuses on leveraging AI in requirements development. This is where mission needs meet the art and science of defining what we must deliver. AI is already helping teams analyze large volumes of operational data, identify capability gaps, and generate draft requirements faster and with greater precision. We'll begin with a panel discussion featuring experts from across government and industry, sharing their perspectives on both the opportunities and the challenges in this space. Then we'll move into 4 fast-paced lightning talks, each one highlighting a specific AI tool or capability that's being used right now to support smarter requirements development. You'll see practical demonstrations of what's possible and get ideas you can take back to your own organizations. At MITRE, we're committed to advancing whole of government innovation through partnerships like this one. NDIA has been an incredible collaborator in helping us connect the defense community and end industry to these emerging technologies. I want to thank all of our panelists, speakers, and participants for being part of this important conversation. I encourage you to engage, ask questions, and think boldly about how AI can help us strengthen our acquisition ecosystem. Thank you again for joining us, and let's get started. I'd like to now pass it over to my colleague, Ryan Novak.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Steve. First of all, thanks, Steve, for your continued partnership within MITRE, leadership in MITRE in this important topic. I also want to give a big thanks to NDIA and ETI, specifically Arun and Wilson, who have been tremendous partners. I want to thank my teammates inwardly that you're not going to see today: Adam Buffard, Chris Barlow, Kevin Forbes, Cameron Hernandez, and many more. And also, I want to say a really big thanks to our industry partners, right, across in our government partners across the space. I mean, we're pushing AI as best we can. We have different techniques, approaches, theories on how to use AI, and that's what we're here for. So we're going to hopefully butt heads a little bit. We're going to share some of the best of what we know and some of the use cases and some of the capabilities, which is great. For those that don't know me, I'm Ryan Novak. So I'm at a MITRE Center for Acquisition and Management Science. I'm a former contracting officer with the Air Force way back in the day. So I have about 30 years in acquisition and been trying to tackle, or at least move the ball on AI and leveraging AI in acquisition for the past 3 or 4 years now. Again, I'm a former CO. We've written several papers on this with NDIA and ETI for Naval Postgraduate School. Like Arun said, we ran a joint symposium. Maybe we might have one in 2026 coming up. And at the end of the day, this is an extremely important topic, AI, leveraging AI for acquisition, right? The way, whether you're industry, your government, your academic, or your MITRE or an FFRDC, the way we're doing business currently is changing, and the way it's fundamentally changing with the use of AI. So this is a very important day. Hopefully we have some cool series coming up. We have a dynamic, like Steve was saying, we have a dynamic series of 4 lightning talks. I think the majority of them will be demonstrations on their capabilities. You can ask questions throughout, so put it in the chat box, or I think we've left some time afterwards too. So please follow up, after the presentations, during the presentations, or even after today, if you have questions. So we need to keep this moving and we need to keep progressing. And so at the end of the day, let's get started. Our first demo is John Ferry, who you can see right now. He'll do an introduction of himself, but he is a co-owner and president of Trenchant Analytics. He brings a background in spec ops and S&T. And a lot of you probably already know John. He's out there. He's moving the ball. He's been leading the development of acbot.com, which is an AI-powered platform supporting government acquisition. So without further ado, John, over to you, and thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. I'll dispense with the long bio sketch since we only have 10 minutes to roll here. But I will pull up my screen and I will indeed roll through. So can you all see what I'm showing?
Yep,
Yes.
We got you.
Oh, wrong desktop. There we go. Share that one.
Yep, this is good too.
Probably better. Okay, so if you don't know ACBot, you can go to acbot.mil. If you're a gov user, if you're an industry user, you may have come in contact with some of the contract vehicles we run. I'm not going to talk about ACBot. What I'm going to talk about is RecBot. So we're looking to build out and deploy a kind of a full-scale feature upgrade to the overall ACBot tool set, which is currently focused on pre- and post-award acquisition processes. The way we see the world is there's kind of 4 major pillars to the acquisition process, and all the way to the left in that process is the requirements process, which historically has been slow, painful, and not terribly responsive to the operational end users. So at a level set, what we're trying to do with RecBot is primarily 3 things. One is close the gap between operational end users and the requirements writers and owners, right? 2, make it much faster and easier for requirements owners and writers to coalesce coherent requirements from that operational force. And then 3, make it much faster and easier to push those requirements to industry to gain industry feedback. So somewhat intuitively, one of the major components of that is an actual end user, an operational force interface for actually expressing those requirements. So this is our kind of field level interface that you're seeing here. And this is so that operational stakeholders have a simple, straightforward, user-friendly way of actually expressing what gaps, requirements, capability limitations they experience. And as a former knuckle dragger infantry special forces guy, like I've been in that spot, and it's something that I identify with, right? I have hated every piece of tech that's ever been given to me, and yet I've never known who to talk to about getting new tech, right? And that is kind of the crux of the issue. So looking at RecBot, this would be the tactical, the field, the operational level interface, and starting with capturing those requirements, those gaps, those needs from the end user. You can start with an AAR or a debrief, right? Having done training or operations, having done a debrief or an AAR off of those operations and load that in as that starting point, or starting with what we're seeing is like a reverse prompt engineered interface where the tool, the platform actually asks the user what questions it needs to understand the features of the problem they're experiencing, right? So you can kind of get ChatGPT to reverse prompt and ask you questions. And that's what we're doing here, is we're trying to get the AI to ask the questions to the end user to gain the context to be able to then develop and write an actual operational requirement statement, whether that's a Siemens, an ONS, a GUONS, what have you, and based contextually off of the context, the criticality, the geographic environment, the operational environment, the command relationship of that end user, be able to feed that into the AI to then actually generate that requirements document, right? So me as an end user, I don't need to know how to write a Siemens, a combat mission needs statement, or a joint urgent operational needs statement, or a more formal requirements document. I interact with the AI, and the AI elicits from me the insights it needs, and then contextually and coherently generates that document for me. So that makes it much easier for me as an end user to get that coherent requirement written and then staffed through the process. And so we've built this such that you can have hierarchical control, right? So at the field and operational level, if your local command receives that requirement from the end users, right, the operators, and can ameliorate, can answer that requirement at that local level, they can do that. But if it needs to be pushed up the chain, if it needs to go to higher headquarters, if it needs to go to a MAGCOM, if it needs to go up to the requirements folks in the 5, the 8 shops to staff that into a broader requirement, then they can do that, right? And it can all be pushed from that end user focus, right? And this helps, again, to relieve that transactional friction between the requirements owners and writers and the folks who actually feel and experience those requirements on a day-to-day basis, right? So when we move up the chain into that enterprise environment, right, we need a way for those enterprise folks, the folks at the MAGCOMs, at the program offices, at the JROC level, to be able to coalesce those requirements, to bring them together into a coherent and consolidated place, right? And so flowing those requirements from the edge, we push them into a graph database, right? And what that does for us is it enables us to pivot and cluster those requirements based off of the individual features, right? Where geographically did that requirement come from? Organizationally, which service or MAGCOM did it come from? What is the technology or the portfolio focus area of that requirement? And we can collect those from very large swaths of the operational force and get diverse viewpoints on those common problems, right? Not just from an Air Force silo or a Navy silo. We can cluster them and then pivot them based off of what kind of scale or focus of problem are we trying to solve? Are we trying to solve counter-UAS only in Indo-PACOM? Are we trying to do it in EUCOM? Are we trying to do it CONUS in NORCOM? Or are we trying to do it across the force, right? And so by pulling in a broad swath of problems from the operational field, we can get a very broad base of what the features of those problems are. We can pull those up into that enterprise level where they get aggregated and actually rolled into solicitations and published requirements. That enables us to then also decompose those things into things like mission threads, the actual technology components, right? So we can decompose those macro requirements based off of those key operational problems into their component parts, right? What does it actually mean to have a counter-UAS problem when you get down to the technical aspects of it? Is it a comms problem? Is it a distance or duration of flight problem? So we can actually break it down into component parts so that we can actually push out to industry, right? And industry engagement is another key area where we tend to fail in this space. It takes so long to get from point of need to point of industry interest and engagement. And that time box is so long that industry is left wondering what the requirements are, and the operational end users are seeing cool things at trade shows that they don't get their hands on for years on end, right? So decomposing those overall COPs into technical features, we can then push those operational problems to our industry, our unified industry interface. So even before a solicitation comes out, we can actively push those requirements out to industry and receive those industry feedbacks, right? What kind of capabilities do you have that answer this operational problem? And we have direct traceability from the group of end users that experience that problem to the program office or the higher headquarters that decomposed and published that requirement, all the way to the vendors who are then proffering solutions, right? And that enables us to close the loop all the way back to the operational edge. So we can push those potential capabilities back out to those end users and get their direct end user feedback on what those potential operational capabilities might be. So we're not guessing, we're not working off of stale requirements documents, we're actually engaging and trying to pull in the feedback loop from that operational force as we are shaping solicitations and procurements. So we're informed when we go to spend money to buy those capabilities by the folks who are actually going to receive them on the back end, which then flows into the procurement processes that ACBOT already does very well, right? We can get those feedbacks from the end users, we can flow those into solicitations, publish those again through that same industry interface back out to industry to get those proposed solutions, award that contract, and then we can go into coordinating field tests and trials. So we actually involve the operational end users in the process of evaluating those capabilities, right? So we have a direct traceability from the people who have the need, the people who are filling the need, the capabilities that are being procured, and then we can go back to that same initial cohort that expressed the need to begin with and pull them into the test evaluation and verification and validation processes. We're closing that entire loop and keeping all of the stakeholders in the process as we go through. We can do this much faster. So we're not going through the process of pushing up needs, having them consolidated and watered down at the headquarters level, then getting translated into statements of work or statements of objective, and then having some niche test out at a field exercise and having all those different processes disconnected, because we can have digital linear traceability from end to end. We can integrate all those people in the same platform. So this is what we're shooting for RecBot. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, John, I'm going to turn you over to Adam. I think there was several questions, but there's one specific one. Adam, you want to ask that from the crowd, please?
Yeah, and I'm going to botch this acronym, but JIATF-401 actively using this capability?
That's a good question. So what's the timeline on this? We're looking to have this capability out as an alpha build, probably in the December timeframe. The overall objective, to be perfectly honest with you, was to have this in place so that as the post JCIDS world starts getting defined and established at the service level, there's an actual digital platform that can help enable that post JCIDS environment.
Awesome. So there's another question. We're going to hold it, John, to the end after the last one, if that's okay. Thank you for your time. Awesome presentation, awesome capability. Thank you. So we're going to move on to Adam Scherer. Adam, if you're on, please come on camera. Adam is an account technical director at Cadence Design Systems. He currently leads a team focused on microelectronics modernization and has held key roles in product management, applications engineering, IEEE test bench, and security standards development, and R&D. That's a mouthful. In total, he has 36 years of experience in electronic design, automation, and software engineering. So thank you, Adam, for joining us. Over to you. And we cannot hear you.
All right, very good. Just making sure my audio is consistent.
Roger.
Good.
Gotcha.
Okay, great. So thank you for the opportunity to speak here and to speak to all of you. I'm going to spend a little bit of time in introducing the part of the acquisition flow where we sit, because it's downstream. So we represent the electronics implementation flow. So a lot of the requirements translation from what John was describing to the systems that have to implement it, down to the resources that have to build it. This is where we fit in. And with so many of the systems today that we bring out to the warfighter that are dependent on electronics, we wanted to bring in an aspect of how these translate, because the level of complexity from a high level, the system needs to fly farther, that it needs to be a more rapid response. The communication system needs to operate under a certain set of duress or under limited capability. Those high level requirements translate into a massive implementation flow. And the question is, can we respond to those fast enough to keep them relevant. So where we fit in is we represent the electronics design automation. And we're here representing the space. I'm primarily going to talk about the space more than Cadence, and I'll give you a little flavor of where we fit in. But we are the electronic design automation space. So companies like Cadence, Siemens, Synopsys, we are the primary suppliers in this area. So in this space, we deliver in really two big areas: the integrated circuits and the circuit boards, the printed circuit boards that those systems go on. All right. So if you've ever seen any of the systems in electronic space, open a computer, look at your cell phone, we do all the electronics that are in those systems, right? And a lot of them are extremely complex. So from there, to give you a sense of the complexity, this is what, at least in the commercial space, our customers do. So it's along the lines of trying to design an entire aircraft in 12 months down to the unbelievably detailed level of implementation and get it all right the first time and turn that again 6 months later, a year later. Right? That type of never-ending cycle. Now, obviously in defense, we have different sets of requirements. We have longevity of systems. We have systems that are fielded for multiple decades. We have to go through sustainment cycles. But what we have found in the latest generation of electronic systems that are being developed is there are gaps in requirements, the specification, the ability to deliver on those specifications. That's been a huge problem slowing the deployment of these systems. So how can we bring in some of the commercial best practice? Right. So getting a little bit closer to kind of connecting with what John was describing. So we fit in on the refinement of those requirements. But those requirements, when they're refined, tend to be a many-to-many mapping. Right, so we would come in on a model-based systems engineering. That's where we begin to connect. But when we're describing a communication system, that system will have an antenna. It's going to have processing of data coming off the antenna. It'll have distribution of that communications for the different aspects of the system, up to the human, and maybe not even with the human in the loop. Right, all of that then gets distributed down to electronic components like processors and analog circuits and signal processing logic and these levels of detail. But there's an enormous amount of detail in that space. So making sure that we have that connection with the requirements is critical. And today, it's completely manual. We have an array of humans that sit at your primes that interact with the requirements of entities to figure out, are the requirements realizable? What kind of systems can we realize these in? What kind of experience does the prime and its subcontractors have to implement those systems? And those engineers often do that outside of the detail of the actual implementation. So they are making underinformed decisions at this level. Right? And this is where we're going to begin to transition to where the AI can fit in. So there are a whole series of assumptions that are made at this level. And I won't go into the detail, but I gave you a couple of examples of questions that may exist. So, and I'll pull out one here. Is the system resilient to memory faults? So we can feel the system that gets engaged in a radiation environment. Is that system going to be able to be resilient? How long will it live in that environment? And that environment might just be an installation in at a mountain level, right? So we've installed a system above 10,000 feet of elevation where it's subject to natural radiation, but it sits there for 20 years if it's called into service. Is it still active? Right? These are questions that may not make it through requirements to specifications to electronics, but we have to be cognizant of it, because the systems that we specify may not have the physical resilience that you need, right? And that's what we need to be able to test. So where does this leave us? In the design automation space, we've been optimizing through computational form for multiple decades, for 40 years of EDA, continuing to reach higher levels of abstraction, being able to handle more complex systems. And we are at an inflection point now where machine learning, AI, and agentic AI are beginning to come into this space to be able to address the next level of complexity. That's the inflection that our overall industry is pursuing. And yes, this is a cadence slide. Our competitors have similar slides. We're all pursuing AI and agentic technology where it can help. And so let me give you now down to where does this become, where is this actionable? So when we receive specifications, when the engineers in our space receive a specification, it'll be something like you see here. The question is, when we begin to implement this in the languages that develop the chips, the implementation, the C code, the register code that programs ASICs and SoCs and FPGAs, the programmable components of the system, are we mapping the specification to those designs accurately? When we have design data and those models, are there unrealized features that we shouldn't have in the system? Right? So how do we compare the specification and the implementation to know that we are building something that actually meets the requirements, that the intended requirement set? So this is an area that AI can help. So where do we begin to use this? We begin to look at this in terms of when we break down to the plans that validate those digital systems. Is that plan sufficient to fully verify the system so that when we build a prototype, move the prototype into field testing, move the field system into deployment to the warfighter, is it going to work? Are there any blind spots? What are the capabilities and limitations of that system? We need to test that as early as possible in the virtual world to make sure we get through those other stages quickly, accurately, and correctly. So again, today, it's all human driven. This is an area where agentic is reading specifications, reading requirements, reading the design code that the engineers are building, and beginning to compare them and enable those engineers to ask fundamental questions about those systems. They can query, is this actually a requirement? I have a feature that is coming along with existing intellectual property. Do I need to cut that feature out because it's not a requirement? Those kinds of things are going to better inform your primes and subs so that you know that the requirements you're putting on them are properly implemented, right? And I'm going to build this out because it's detailed set of code, but this is the endpoint of one of the tools in this space. So from that set of requirements, we can build a set of assertions. I'll just put a little pointer on where we're going. So from a set of requirements, we're going to generate code that monitors this design and assures the assertion that the requirement is properly implemented in the system, and we sustain that requirement throughout its life cycle. Right? Today, we're relying on engineers to read through this and build enough of these assertions and general verification technology to be sure that the system is implemented properly. Agentic is a way to make sure that those engineers are as properly informed as they can be, and that the systems are implemented according to the requirements. And the goal is to then feed this back up through into the procurement process to make sure that you're procuring systems that can be implemented in the time frame you need to the requirements that you desire. So I'll just finish up here. This is a cadence slide. All right, so we have quite a few technologies in this space. These are the technologies that are being actively used in the IC and the circuit board development flows. The point that we bring out are the blue arrows, are where the AI and the agentic feedback. So as we gather data, develop data out of these engines, we're making more of this information available to the engineers so they can make more objective decisions, feeding that back up to the requirements process. Right. So I'll finish here. Hopefully that was within time. If there are questions, I can field.
Yep. Yeah, thanks, Adam. Sure. Adam Buffard from MITRE. Any questions for Adam?
No, I don't think so. We have one that we need to hold till the end. We'll ask
Okay.
at that point, but we're good for now.
Awesome. Adam, thank you so much for your time. And
Thank you.
Like I said, questions will be coming forth here. So great. So moving on, our next presenter is August Chen. August is the co-founder and CEO of Hazel, an AI-empowered procurement platform that helps federal, state, and local partners compress procurement cycles from months to minutes and saves millions on what they purchase. Hazel launched out, of Y Combinator in 2024 and is backed by investors behind Palantir and Anduril. Before founding Hazel, August led mission-critical deployments at Palantir, where his work helped California utility, PG&E, save over $100 million in procurement costs. So without further ado, August, over to you.
Thanks, Ryan. It's
Yep.
always funny to hear the intro that I guess we teed up out loud for
doubt.
the first time. Thanks for the intro. Okay, hi everyone. My name is August Chen. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Hazel. And so, as Ryan mentioned, we build AI-powered procurement software for all levels of government to accelerate some of the most critical tasks that block the user and the officer who's trying to buy very specific things to the actual purchase itself. And so today, in talking about AI for requirements building, I'm going to specifically showcase how we turn these specific actions in procurement and acquisitions from reactive to proactive. And we're going to show how we can build solicitation from scratch in literally less than a minute, depending on what it is you're looking for, as well as how do you build in tools in place so that you're not only one doing your job faster, but you're also doing your job completely compliantly without missing a beat incorrectly. So I'm going to start sharing my screen and hope everyone can see this. All right. So on this page of the home page of the Hazel process, I'm going to show you again two tools, Solicitation Builder and also Scope Review, to kind of talk to the points I was just explaining. The first piece is in Solicitation Builder. You want to be able, or our customers today have this challenge, obviously, which is not uncommon across both federal and SLED, that you're spending months putting together these massive requirements documents and solicitations that just require a lot of context and information. Well, specifically in this space, let's say that we're trying to build a document from scratch that is just like an RFQ for solutions for anything. And instead of trying to reinvent the wheel each time, really what should be going on is that like the set of experts in the room or people who know the situation the best need to be able to construct these requirements in one place super quickly. So if I click into new solicitation over here, and I'm going to start building any new document, let's say over here is an RFQ. Well, it's going to understand what the RFQ needs, and we want to be able to write requirements from scratch that fit the RFQ. You can copy from an existing one, or you can generate from the scope document, either way. And any way that you can provide the best information possible, that's the path you want to go down. So in clicking into here next, I'm going to just copy and paste in a description for something I'll also demo later, which is how do you want to build an AI smart contracting process? So this is a solicitation that came out recently too, so we can look at how this would work inside the Hazel platform. This description is going to showcase like, okay, well, this is the mission statement. This is what we're looking for. Let's generate these requirements. And so in the back end of what Hazel's doing, we're synthesizing a ton of information from both commercial and government data sources, however much is available to you, to be able to actually put into blocks how different folks involved in the process need to understand requirements. And so that could be categorical from anything technical to anything functional, business-based, compliance-based, right? Super important pieces that different people have to be aware of and be able to collaborate on super quickly. And so in this one environment, being able to actually go ahead and understand, well, these are all the things that are going to go into our solicitation makes it really easy for our users to just go in, edit them, kind of agree together, and then kind of fight like what it is we're looking for all at once together. And you can go in, edit whatever it is you need, and get done with this very quickly. Then this represents essentially, let's say, getting to 70, 80% of the final thing, right? Like this is very much so where then the human needs to be in the loop, but we can make that even better because on the right-hand side, we have a chatbot that actually allows you to understand even more context, or to say like, hey, I want to advance my understanding of this requirement, or like, hey, you mentioned this thing. How do I actually better understand that? If you're a warfighter at the edge and like you're like this is the first time you're looking at this requirements for the first time before you need to go buy something. Not only being able to onboard yourself and to understanding the knowledge base behind it really quickly is important, but also being able to literally analyze anything else alongside building the official thing is extremely critical. All right. So then when it comes time to building the document, as we all know within the DoD and FAR's acquisitions process, there's a ton of information that just can't get lost. And so for all those pieces, you want to be able to more or less use a workflow and just insert administrative information that's really critical. And sometimes there will be questions that says, hey, does this contract involve software and stuff? And we can actually guide users into answering these questions properly, also with AI. So in this sense, AI here is mostly meant to just synthesize a lot of old data and help you understand, hey, like what is directionally the best way to go? But also at the same time, just making sure that you as human in the loop are making the best possible decisions in generating this type of data. So when it comes time to export, I'm going to use this other one as an example. It goes ahead, lands here in the files folder that I can just go ahead and download. And when I want to go open it, this is what it looks like. So this is an example from one of our customers in the SLED space, the Port of Philadelphia, and being able to just literally inject information into a compliant solicitation makes it such that the final work gets done a lot faster. And this is what is able to get our customers from 0 to 1 in a compliant fashion, and like being able to push out to market down from like months, if not a full year, down to just a couple of weeks for our current set of customers. And so, yeah, it ingests the requirements, synthesizes it into the document intelligently, including at the bottom here where you might have sections for general services versus specific disciplines. All that gets done super easily. All right. So now going into scope review really quickly. The other thing is that you want to catch anything that's compliance-based or anything that you might want to sense is like, hey, like I just want to know if I'm going to be able to have any hard questions to answer. And so here's the actual scope of work that came out for the Army for this call for solutions, and it got delayed by I think like weeks, if not more than a month, because of how many questions they received. And so being able to just upload that into our system and understand, well, where are the fallbacks in like us having these requirements, we can more or less predict like all the time what contractors and vendors are going to sense as gaps, so that when you then go back onto the market, you're presenting your best foot forward, right? And so that actually makes you more proactive and best prepared to understand what your vendors really need, because they sense that they want to know that you know like what you're looking for, but that's not always the case. And you want to be able to just like have a bulletproof set baseline so that they can then respond to it. And the best way to do that is just to be able to utilize AI in an intelligent way to just check, hey, anything that I wrote in here would be questioned, or anything in here might have like things that I need to like address in the future. For instance, number 4, talking about this OCI analysis, it says nowhere else in the document that it required OCI analysis. So that was an incredibly common question from vendors and could have been prevented if you use this review to make sure that everything before it went out to the market, like that you covered all your bases. So with that, those are just 2 really easy ways that at least we help our customers today in terms of, one, keeping your requirements like incredibly detailed, but at the same time just enough so that you know exactly what we're putting out to the market. You're not trying to reinvent the wheel because you can synthesize old data. But also 3, you're ensuring that as human in the loop, you are making the final decision, but you're also making as fewer mistakes as possible. And that's how Hazel helps its customers today. And not only do we have a strong baseline in SLED, we are growing in terms of our usership in federal space as well. So happy to talk about that any further. Or if you want to reach me afterwards, you can reach me on LinkedIn, or my email is august@hazelai.com.
Awesome. August, thank you for your time. Adam Buffard, any questions in the chat that should be answered now?
Yeah, there's one that says, is Hazel connected or embedded in current contract writing systems that the US government uses?
It is not live in production today, but obviously our hope is that we will be able to, one, help the DoD help, federal government, create programs to allow for technologies like Hazel's or ActBot to be used more widely, but also to, of course, as we make our system more and more robust and mature, that it can be even more off the shelf, and officers within the federal government can experiment more with these types of technologies.
And there's two others, Ryan, but I think we'll save them for the last Q&A unless they get answered live.
Okay.
They're more generic.
Yeah, perfect. August, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. And hopefully you stick around for the Q&A session afterwards. So great. Thank you. So we're going to move on to, I'm going to say Dave Z, but I'm going to try to pronounce the last name. Dave Zavonic. Probably screwed that up.
Dave Z is actually how it's pronounced, weirdly.
Okay, perfect. Dave Z is an attorney, strategist, author, full stack software developer, an innovative former government executive who helps businesses and government work smarter together. Among his previous roles, Dave served as senior technical advisor and assistant commissioner for the U.S. General Services Administration's GSA Federal Acquisition Service Office of Systems Management. So without further ado, Dave, over to you.
Thanks, Ryan. Hey, everybody, I'm Dave Z. Really pleased to be joining you today. One of the things that before I do the demo, maybe it's useful to contextualize sort of where I'm coming from. We're seeing a lot of demos about AI and requirements, but one of the things that, having been at GSA and having worked with a lot of the procurement systems, I'm going to admit a dirty little secret, which I think everyone on this call probably knows, which is that the data is really hard to work with. It's poorly modeled. You're interacting with different data systems. Even within those data systems, sometimes they're unreliable and they can be really slow. And this was something that I experienced on the government side at GSA. And it's something that I experience on the industry side almost every day. And so when we talk about AI, one of the things that I wanted to do is to show you how we're approaching this at MakeGov, which is the company that I'm here on behalf of today. I'm the CEO of MakeGov, and also give you an intuition about how you and the government might want to approach this problem too. So without further ado, let me go ahead and share my screen, make sure that I've got the right screen up here. Can you all see requirements, this dancer thing? Just want to make sure that I've got the right screen.
Yes.
Up. Okay.
You got it.
All right. So I'm using two emoji here. It's Tango plus AI sparkles equals requirements. Tango is the name of my product. So what is Tango? Tango is a developer and LLM-friendly API to federal procurement data. I've taken all of the procurement data sets that you can imagine, the FPDSs, the SAMs, the USA spendings, the SBAs, and then so on and so forth, and ultimately tried to figure out how to take them, make it comprehensive, and properly model them. I mean, one of the things that I think, every company out there is trying to figure out SAM.gov data, cool, except everyone knows that SAM notices and SAM opportunities aren't the same. And what you really want is the opportunity, not the notice, but it turns out that modeling SAM opportunities is harder than it looks. So really try to take the efforts to model things correctly, make it performant, allow you to shape the responses so you don't get all the junk that you don't need, but only the junk that you do need, and then providing developer friendly capabilities like webhooks, open API specs, bulk data, and so on and so forth. So that's what Tango is. It basically gives you all of the data that you need to be able to do these fancy AI workflows, but with a single API key and something that's going to perform really effectively. And so, as we came in today, you just saw a couple of presentations about how you can leverage AI and data to create better solicitations, and they're really awesome UIs and actually really impressive demos. But if you're thinking about this as your own sort of thing, how can I use AI and data to create better solicitations? Obviously, you can go buy the existing SaaS products, and I definitely encourage you to look at them. But maybe your requirements are a little bit different and you want to try something sort of more custom. And so as I think about this, and I'm thinking about empowering public sector builders, one of the conversations that I would think about is like, what if we could, collect similar requirements from previous solicitations? So in August's demo, you see that upload a previous solicitation. As a former govy who was working in the acquisition space, what I can tell you is that copy pasta happens all the time. You take a previous solicitation, you try to figure out what they said. How do I copy the best parts of that? How do I put that into my my RFP or RFQ? And so I decided to just use the data to do a little bit of a basic AI and ML. And so what this fundamentally did, and I'll show you how this actually works, is I used a couple of different techniques. One, I used an LLM to actually create what I call requirements clusters. So I took a bunch of solicitations. I can identify the substantive requirements within those solicitations, and then within a given product service code and within a given contract size, cluster them using basically a machine learning technique to create topics or requirements clusters. And then you can find solicitation that matches your requirements and get information about the acquisition strategies for those requirements and information about incumbents and contract size so that you can decide whether you want to use that particular language or not. And so I'm going to shift my screen to the next tab here, just so you can see what this looks like. And fair bit of warning, there's data caching under the hood, so it's not going to be doing all the data caching right now, but I want you to just see what this flow could look like if you were doing this yourself. So I'm importing the requirements. For those of you who aren't data scientists, this is what's called a Jupyter notebook. And basically a Jupyter notebook is running the code sort of live as you go. So this is what the data looks like coming out of the Tango API. You've got all these attachments. You've got all of the contract IDs, the solicitations. So now I'm going to skip over this. That's just creating what's called the data frame, computing some basic statistics, figuring out who the top recipients are. And this is all coming straight out of the API, nothing too fancy. This next part is kind of neat. This is where I just used GPT 4.0 mini. You can use whatever LLM you want. If you want to do it locally, you can do it locally. That's fine. But what you're fundamentally doing is extracting requirements from the solicitations that you have so that you can figure out what are the substantive elements. Here's an example of what this might look like. So you can see for this particular PSC that I was working with, which is related to, I think, airport construction and runways and taxiways, you've got, sort of requirements like milling and overlay of asphalt requirements and new paving markings and joint resealings. These are the types of things that you would find in a solicitation. So you've got all these categories, you've got all these deliverables, you've got all these these requirements that might show up in a solicitation that's tagged to the solicitation ID that comes from the combination of FPDS and SAM. So again, skipping over the requirements of the data frame here, but ultimately showing that you've got these, at least out of these 18 solicitations, you've got 117 different topics or different clusters. So now what you're doing is you're clustering these requirements, creating a clustering model. So we're using BER topic, but you can use anything you want. If you want K-means, you want HVD scan, whatever you're doing. If you're doing hierarchy trees, however your AI sort of works, you can make that a thing. And then you can explore the different types of requirements that come up. And so how might you use this as a practical practitioner? You might say, I don't want to work from a blank slate. I want to know for this particular type, this product service code, what are the types of things I need to be thinking about? Well, I need to be thinking about safety construction. I need to think about the apron parking. I need to think about the cargo pad. Like, these are the types of things that you would need to know. So when you're putting together your own solicitation, you've got all of these different considerations in play. You can sort of see the different clusters, and again, figure out what types of words would go into the particular topic, and then ultimately the recipients that are getting those types of those contracts. You can do segmentation by contract size. You can also do some similar solicitations. So this is where August's demo would be particularly useful, is you can start to say, okay, well, now I can figure out the similarity of the particular solicitation based on the topics that I'm looking for. And then you can see, okay, well, which companies have been winning it, which agency, you can go see the actual solicitation and see what you want to pull from. You can analyze the acquisition strategy and what that's meant for the particular topic. And again, this is the sort of thing that might be specific to your workflow, but you ultimately need that data in order to be able to do this work. And so all of which is to say, this is all only possible if you have the data in a way that doesn't make it miserable to get, the solicitation, the press contracts, the recipient information, and all of that to you in sort of a couple of clicks. So, full disclosure, this thing was entirely vibe coded in about 2 hours from start to finish. I had this idea about the requirements cluster. I said, what could I do if I had these particular things? I didn't have to go do any sort of fancy UI. I didn't have to do any fancy requirements. But what I was able to do is say, I have an intuition about how I'd be able to use this data to be able to generate the requirements that I might that I might need. And the only way that you can realistically do that is if you have the data in the first place. So hopefully that's helpful. And that's my demo. If you have any questions, happy to chat with you. My email is dave@makegov.com. And obviously, if you wanted to sign up, there is a free tier for Tango. It's tango.makegov.com. You can try it out right now. Check out the docs, and thanks for letting me demo.
Dave, awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Adam Buffard, any questions specifically before we go into the general Q&A session?
Yeah, for Dave, we have, since PSCs can be misapplied or misused, do you have other ways to build a requirements cluster?
It's a great question. So yeah, PSCs 100% can be misapplied or misused. I just use that as one particular filter, but you can absolutely take any particular types of solicitations. You can, for Tango, you can filter by keyword, you can filter by NAICS code, you can filter by agency, whether it's funding or awarding. There's any number of ways that you can sort of dissect that data. I just used it for this purposes of this conversation. To be able to identify the types of solicitations that might be relevant.
Okay, great. Adam, any other specific ones for Dave?
Not specific, but I have one, I guess, for all of the Lightning Talk folks. Given AI's inherent nature to be using LLMs from given data sets, how are these tools incorporating testing and validation for accuracy and ensuring errors in its response? Or I guess it was ensure errors are detected in its responses. Excuse me, I didn't see the second part. I.e. applying some skeptical intelligence to spot hallucinations and or wrong responses. So I guess I open that up to the 4 Lightning Talks on who would like to answer that one. Looks like August is typing an answer. If you want to come on camera and answer it live, August, you can.
I think I was halfway typing the answer, and then I remember Brian said, "Oh, save your answer for later." So yeah, really straightforward. The way that Hazel directly answered this, the way that Hazel tests is we run very guided sessions with users to make sure that, hey, if you're going to develop this XYZ thing, let's try running it, and then let's compare it against what was traditionally written. So for example, I was trying to rewrite requirements for this Army AI smart contracting initiative. And you can compare against like what humans have wrote in the past, what humans might expect after they read the output. And I know it's more subjective because this is all like a very natural language task. But the more of that subjective data that you can collect and try and quantify it, the better you are then able to develop systems that actually can cache these things. Like for instance, we built out the scope reviewer as a direct result of making sure that you actually have that additional layer on top at the end to make sure that whatever it is you're actually putting out into the market sufficiently captures exactly what would be considered accurate, right? Because AI has different modes of thinking. It is either interpolating data and trying to make decisions, or it's going the other way around and trying to be generative. And so on the one hand, you can be generative. On the other hand, you want to be more predictive and just like assess things. So that's how we do it at Hazel.
John or Dave? Or Adam? Anything to add?
I'll say my answer is pretty well in line with August. I mean, and this kind of goes to there are right ways to build systems and wrong ways to build systems. And I think one of the tasks that is incumbent on us who build tools and platforms is building intuitive ways to mitigate those types of things. So similar thing, right? Like RAG is a thing. So having a corpus, a knowledge base of content for an AI to draw from, right? So having a initial basis of what write looks like as you are writing a new document is one thing. We also do a lot of grounding in like the way that ACBOT works is like the system already knows what your version of a statement of work, a statement of objectives, you know, J&A, a DNF, whatever your document is for those workflows, it already knows what that's supposed to look like contextually. And so it's breaking that overall task down into much smaller buckets with recursive checks on, you know, if there are compliance items that need to be checked, right? Agentic AI is really great for that. And then I think at the end of the day, something that needs to be mentioned is like the human is still 100% in the loop. So enabling the humans to go faster by offloading the drudgery tasks to the AI frees up the cognitive load of the human to focus on those finer grain, more elegant tasks. And I think if you're coming at this discussion with a frame of reference from like trying to get ChatGPT to spit out something coherent, that is a 12-month-old frame of reference. Today, it's all about RAG, vector RAG, and tightly tailored generation tasks that are breaking those larger tasks into smaller ones so that it's something that's tractable and also checkable.
Great. Thank you, John. Dave, you want to add anything? I think we have one more question real quick from the group. Okay. Adam, I want to ask that last question.
Yeah, this will be the last one for the for Lightning Talks. But are all of these vendors using CDAOs, Open Dagger, or Tradewinds ecosystems? If units want to use these tools, how do they gain access to them? I think John's answering in chat, but if you want to come online and answer or do it that way, that's fine too.
So if you're in DoD, you can log into ACBOT with your CAC card. You just go to acbot.mil, acqbot.mil. If you have a CAC card, you log in automatically. It's free. For FedCiv, it's a little bit more complex. Our FedRAMP High authorization is still in process. So that's coming probably around the beginning of the year for the FedCiv cohort. But for military folks, you can do it right now.
Great. Okay, we're almost at the, I'm going to ask one last really quick one, like 15 seconds. So we're going to go around the group. Just first of all, thank you all for speaking. Awesome job. Last thought to the community here on requirements specifically. John, go first. Last nugget.
Yeah, I think, net of net, acquisition as a process, requirements being a component of that process are inherently human-based, but largely manual, linear processes. And in government, there are a lot of things that AI is not good at doing, but for structured, linear, process and policy-driven workflows, that's really what AI is actually good at right now. So I think leaning forward and adopting AI to accelerate these processes is something that, frankly, with the DERP, the RIF, and the fork, we don't have the luxury of time to not do.
Awesome. Thank you. Dave, last nugget.
I mean, same as before. It's the data. If you're going to do AI, you got to have good data. You got to make sure the data is in the right place, using it correctly. Otherwise, all of it's just all of it's just a good idea.
Yeah. Thank you. August, last nugget.
Yeah, I'll kind of share a little bit about what my engineer told me earlier this year that really stuck with me, which is we think so much about the big, sexy topics about how to use AI to run the most complicated RFPs and acquisitions out there. But on the whole, at 70%, 80% of these are just regular acquisitions that you're doing over and over again. So why are we reinventing the wheel? And to that, I say, yeah, well, in that case, if you think about those examples, I think the path towards why we should be implementing AI to do these requirements and acquisitions becomes a lot more straightforward.
Yeah, awesome. And the last one, Adam, last nugget.
Yeah, the one that we haven't surfaced, DMS projects. There's a huge backlog of these. The data is scattered and thin. This is an area where AI can certainly augment humans in both the acquisition process and the implementation process. We need this to pull together the disparate sets of thin information to be able to turn those as quickly as sustainment expects them.
Excellent. Thank you all again. Awesome job. Really appreciate your insights and the capabilities you shared. So we're going to move on to this next phase. I'm going to introduce you to Moshe Schwartz, who will be leading this next phase. So a real quick introduction. Moshe is president of Etherton and Associates, a consulting and lobbying firm specializing in defense acquisition, the industrial base, and cybersecurity policy. Prior to joining Etherton and Associates, Moshe served as executive director of the congressionally mandated advisory panel on streamlining and codifying acquisition regulations, and he spent 15 years providing analysis and legislative support to Congress on acquisition policy and industrial-based issues, including as a specialist at the Congressional Research Service and senior analyst at GAO. So without further ado, Moshe, over to you. Thank you.
That was a mouthful.
Yes, it was.
Let me clarify. You said spending 15 years providing advice to Congress. They didn't listen, so it's not my fault.
That's right.
Let's be clear. Thank you all for joining us. And first of all, thank you all of you, Ryan, for moderating that, and for all the people that presented those excellent demonstrations. And thank you all for joining us for the panel on AI for requirements, modernizing DoD's requirements process. Our conversation, to be clear, is not about how to buy AI. Rather, we'll focus on how to leverage AI to improve the requirements process like you just saw in those demonstrations. This question is important really for two reasons, just to set the stage. Like John said and Dave just said, the requirements process is slow, it's cumbersome, it's human-centric, and by definition, therefore, it inherently means that there's a limit to how fast it will execute and how much data can be ingested and leveraged to make better requirements decisions. And it turns out, and this is why this is such a well-timed discussion, is that this administration and the Department of Defense is focusing on streamlining and accelerating at speed all aspects of acquisition, including particularly the requirements process and leveraging AI. The second reason why this is a perfect time for this conversation is because we see in both the House and Senate versions of the National Defense Authorization Act, and we saw in the new DoD requirements approach that JCIDS is purportedly dead, right? And it has not been replaced with anything specifically. So this is a good opportunity to think, well, based on that August 20th DoD memo disestablishing JCIDS and ordering the JROC to stop validating service requirements, it's almost a clean sheet for requirements, right? So let's have that conversation. Ryan introduced a number of the people who are on the panel. So we have joining us Scott Stapp, Adam Scherer, John Ferry, and August Chen. Let me just only introduce Scott Stapp because we've heard from everybody else who Ryan already introduced. Scott's a retired Air Force Brigadier General, and particularly a former director of both the JROC and OSD's Special Program Office. He now works in the venture capital and private equity world and is the current CTO for DEF CON AI. So without further ado, let me turn it over to you, Scott, please, to start our conversation.
Okay, thanks, Moshe. And I want to say the demos are amazing, and it shows you what AI can actually do in the requirements world. I'm going to take a little different tact, which is what makes it difficult for AI to be ingested into the department. And what I'll just tell you flat out, and I did 10 years as the CTO for a major defense contractor working AI. So I've worked with all the major AI companies and then going back to two specific jobs. The first one we're going to say is running the JROC and the JCIDS process. And I will tell you, because we were part of the ones recommending JCIDS be sunsetted, is the requirements process is a very subjective process. And what you'll see is what Title 10 originally wrote for how you set requirements is you're supposed to trade off cost, schedule, and performance when setting requirements. And I'm going to talk mainly about ACAT 1, big programs, because August talked about, hey, AI should be ingested into the lower level programs instantaneously. A lot of that is repetitive and it could easily be done. But the vast majority of department money is spent on ACAT 1 programs. And that's where we really need to streamline. And what you'll see is when I ran the JROC, you can imagine is if you're going to trade off cost, schedule, and performance when setting requirements, there is a knee in the curve that you get to, right? You go, hey, I get improvement. I start getting diminishing return on that for increasing costs, and you want to hit the knee in the curve. What we found out working with the services and others is it's almost impossible to find the knee in the curve. And the example I give is what's a good kill ratio? Is it, if you're having fighter on fighter, is it 1v1? Hey, we lose one. Is it 1-2? Is it a 3-to-1 kill ratio? Is it a 4-to-1? Is it 10-to-1? Is it 15-to-1 like F-22? And what you found out is that what ops analysis would do, and this is where AI can help, what we would do in 2 months, really you could get AI to do in a matter of minutes. But the answer still came back the same from the customer, which is not good enough. I want the best. We started coining the term desirements, because even if we gave them the optimal that, hey, you can win the war, this is a cutting edge capability, they always wanted something well above that. What you've really seen is that is what has complicated the acquisition process. That's why you see F-22s delivering 10 years late, F-35s delivering 15 years late, because what they want is the best of the best of the best. And what you'll see is where when you go to war, our adversaries don't mind throwing human capital at the problem set. And the US has never wanted to throw human capital at the problem set. So losing one person is too many, which means how do you set a requirement for AI to understand that you can't lose anybody, because what you end up getting is, again, kind of what I'd call substandard requirements. And so it's really understanding how the department can ingest things that are much more mathematical, that are much more, as John would say, linear, that you understand, and you take some of the subjectivity out of it, because requirements are a human process, but if you make it just a human process only, and that's the dominating factor, what you get is desirements. And that becomes a problem set. One of the ones I'm not going to address, because Dave already addressed it, was data. Data is not clean. Data is a problem in the department. It's hard to get to it. But the second one I'm going to address, which is from the other job I had, which was OSD SAPCO, is data is not shared. And there's two different types of data that are not shared. Services do not share data across. And in special programs do not share data with anybody except for their unitary program. I'll give you an example where that becomes a problem. If I wanted to get requirements for a penetrating fighter aircraft, and it was a unitary aircraft for the Air Force, what I would start debating is how fast it goes, how far it goes, how many weapons it goes, how much stealth it has to have, all those things going in, which can make it really huge as far as a capability. Just developing that, it makes it very costly, it makes it very heavy. So I'll give you an example. With space now becoming a dominant factor and unclassified, we've said we've moved GMTI to space and some other stuff. If you were to develop instead a fighter aircraft that did this, that actually got all of its data from space, so it didn't need its own radar, it was actually pulling data from other places, from space, from naval assets, you can make it the stealth requirements much less because it's looking well over the horizon. You can use longer range weapons. You can do all sorts of things that make you look at the trades that are possible when you ingest information from multiple systems. If right now any of the services were to really use AI to do requirements for a major system, what you would get is a sub-optimized system. You would get a fighter aircraft that really acted as its own asset, didn't leverage anything across the joint community. For those who are tracking what the Joint Staff has developed, which is called the Joint Warfighting Concept, and JCIDS, which is about data sharing and moving everything across the board, what you're going to see is that the real hurdles to ingesting AI into the department is data sharing. So it's not just unclean data, it's an inability to get access to data. And what you'll see really becomes a problem is in the special program side is they do that intentionally. They don't know how to overcome that. If you ever had all the data in a single place, the special programs world would say, that's a huge vulnerability to me. I can't have all that information in one place. If you gave AI all that information, I have no doubt you could get some amazing systems out of it. But I think over time, what we're going to see is for AI to be effectively ingested into the department. Again, I'm going to surmise that AI could solve this problem. There's no doubt in my mind. If you give it the clean data and you open it up to it, it will give you better requirements, better capabilities, a better acquisition process. But if you can't get it in, it does you no good. The department is going to have to change its policies, its culture that says data sharing and information sharing and requirement sharing across agencies and services is important. And that it is not a subjective matter. It is a, hey, you can, if the goal for the US was to go into a war and we can't lose a single person, it will cost you infinite. There has to be a trade, and nobody knows where that marker is. And allowing mathematics to determine some of that sounds a little callous, but I think we're going to have to go there if you're going to actually use AI and not use subjective measures in doing it. So again, I'm going to keep this kind of short. Those, I think, are the major hurdles to ingesting AI into the Department of Defense. Once it's ingested, I have no doubt it'll be unbelievably successful. Moshe, back to you.
Thanks, Scott. Adam, can I turn it over to you now? Adam, I think you're on mute.
I think we might have lost Adam. So let's move on to the next person while he gets back online.
Okay, so if I can turn it over to you, John.
Yeah, no, I think directionally, and I'll be brief and blunt, right? I think the directionally, shutting down JCIDS is good. We can all complain about JCIDS. Frankly, I think less attention that should be paid is not paid to the whole PPP&E and appropriations process, which is where a lot of this actually rubber meets the road, right? You can want everything you want, but if there's not budget headroom in a program element, like you can't buy anything. And I'm also specifically talking about DoD rather than other Fed Civ orgs. The other thing I'll note, and I just kind of put it out there, and I know we're going to talk about culture later, is that like, love that the memo came down, love that JCIDS was kind of killed, I love that they pushed more acquisition authority down to the services. I will be interested to see how that shakes out in practice. I know the Army is coming out with their new acquisition force design, which will help integrate T2Com more directly into the acquisitions process. That's all yay verily. That said, like, people have been doing stuff the same way, frankly, since McNamara. You can say that JCIDS came around since 2003, but really we've been doing stuff kind of in the large systems acquisition world, kind of to Scott's point, since the 70s. Been buying systems for 30-year life cycles for 60 years. And it takes a while to break that habit. And my kind of point is, there's some new folks that will want to do things more aggressively, right? The precious few people who have actually used the adaptive acquisition framework in practice. But particularly for ACAP programs, like, the way that things have been done for 20 years is the way that things are going to habitually be done. And it's going to actually take a long time, years, for that culture and that muscle memory to shift from the traditional top-down V shape of the requirements to procurement process and more into a direct linear form. So I think there's a lot of thought that needs to go into that, and a lot of actual like leadership that needs to come down from the top. And I think we need to focus particularly on the individual level, like, what is the carrot and the stick for making these requirements processes go faster? Because you can say you want stuff better, faster, cheaper, but unless there is a promotion or a demotion involved in that equation, like, what's the incentive to do stuff different when the other side of the coin is risk? So I don't know, that's kind of my hot take.
John, that is a great take, and I think you're setting up some real good thoughts for a Q&A. But until then, let me just turn it over to Adam.
So just a couple of points as we again observe all that you've been talking about in this group, and where you are setting up requirements for overall systems. Part of the challenge that we observe is when those get out into the defense industrial base for implementation, even if they come in through a prime, the prime begins to break those requirements down into the subs, and we lose context. So some of the things that you're trying to get to, the traceability of the requirement all the way through, the qualification that a requirement can actually be implemented as intended, we don't have context, right? So we're breaking down not to the, let's say, overall communication system of a weapons environment. We're going to break down to someone who's supplying an antenna, or the antenna and the processing unit right behind it, or an EW system, right? So it's outside the context of the overall set of requirements. So yes, we can apply AI and agentic methods to assure that those sub-requirements are met and the breakdown, but we're losing context, right? So the ability to aggregate all of this together into a centralized view is a challenge. And I don't have a good answer for that, right? Because on one hand, if you say, okay, for an ACAT-1 system, we're going to bring all the requirements and all the electronics together into a single repository, that scares me. I'm not sure that that's really a good idea. If I were an adversary, that would be my target, right? But then how do we translate that so that we can provide appropriate secure methods of breaking those requirements down and then pulling them back up in a timely fashion so that we can still get to the answers we need without disclosing more about those systems than we need to. I don't have a great answer, but that's an area, that's something we're going to need to address if we're going to make this much more efficient. I'll kind of finish up there.
Thanks, Adam. Well, fortunately, August is next. Maybe I'll have that answer. All right. Go ahead, August.
Especially I think at the more complex acquisitions that, we need to address, it's so difficult, right? Because I mean, just looking at some of the more technical, like cloud solutions that need to be integrated over the last couple of years that, the DoD is looking for. With any solutions, particularly when I was at Palantir, there's this huge idea of just like, hey, like, do you go for like multiple vendors that can tackle each individual things, or do you go for like one provider who can do everything? And when you're building requirements for that, they're like entirely like dichotomies of each other. And so, like, in lieu of that, where you realize, okay, well, people who are making these strategic decisions need to kind of take a step back and say, like, well, how do we know what works and what doesn't work? And I think that requires the ability, and that's why I think removing JCIDS is so exciting, for the ability to kind of go back to this culture of just like, how can we experiment again, right? Like, how can we face, programs where we can build requirements for it, know that this is going to happen quickly, like lower the risk of what we're applying to it so that we can still achieve some ROI. But let's say it doesn't work out, then we can pivot quickly and make sure that like we can move on to the next best thing to kind of go at it. And this is very much so what I found to be successful during my time at Palantir, and certainly something that I keep in mind when we're trying to develop out these procurements for like our government partners, right? Because like they think that they need to have it correctly the first time. But the promise of AI is that like, hey, you can work really quickly and come to a much better solution in way shorter time. And if you can actually do that on a timely basis, perhaps you can just do more and experiment more and see where that goes from there. So that's like my 2 cents on that.
August, thanks. Appreciate that. So there are a lot of questions that are coming in, but I do want to start with one specifically because, Scott, you brought up data challenges at DoD, and John, you raised some of the culture, people challenges, and Adam and August were chiming in there. And I think that just poses the overarching question, is DoD ready for AI-powered requirements development? Do they have the data? Do they know how to, when they have it, share it? Do they have the right processes for leveraging the AI? And maybe we'll just start with you, Scott.
So here's what's funny, and we've talked about JCIDS a lot, right? But here's what's interesting about JCIDS and the JROC. The JROC was only supposed to look at joint programs, period. Programs that cross services and integrate and actually provide a greater force by integrating. Every other program already went to the services. By the dissolution of JCIDS, what you see is they weren't being effective in joint integration. They couldn't get the Navy and the Air Force to develop common systems that shared information. You couldn't get space systems to share information with the Air Force or the Navy. So what you see is really by dissolution of JCIDS, it just goes back to the services, right? So the services already owned everything else. Now they just own everything. I think that what that does to us in the long run is it actually makes the services unitary warfighters. Well, the problem is today, no service can fight the war on their own. They used to be able to in the past. Our adversaries figured out how to integrate everything in, quote, a JADC2 kind of fashion. It is now incumbent upon the services to work together. If you ingest AI now, and all it does is optimize the services capabilities, you've still sub-optimized for the joint warfight. Absolutely guaranteed. So I think you can ingest AI, but again, it hasn't fixed the core problem, which is the DoD needs to fight as an integrated force, and they have not figured out how to work across services and then agencies to include, basically space systems, IC. Until they do that, you will just sub-optimize the use of AI. In fact, it may actually hurt you and design systems that don't work together.
So it's not necessarily a technology problem, it's a people problem.
I've been having this discussion up at the senior level for a very long time, and I've told them none of this is a technology problem. This is culture, policy, politics, and bureaucracy. 100%.
John, thoughts?
Of course, it's a people problem, right? These are all people processes. And I mean, 9 times out of 10, it boils down to my cheese, right? Like if I have money in my budget line, like there's how many joint budget lines are there? No, nobody's going to the DMAG or the JROC fighting for, their joint requirements lines. No, they're being told by the JROC and the joint councils to spend their blue, red, green colored money on, somebody else's wants, needs, desires. So, that's kind of the one thing. So the one thing I'll push back on, and for what it's worth, I worked at DARPA when the term JCIDS was coined and the people who coined it, right? So I was there for the AB2 and all that stuff. I am skeptical that JCIDS is actually going to be a thing. And I think it may be a mirage to think that that is some sort of magical Ender's Game panacea to future fighting. So like maybe we're chasing a ghost in that regard anyhow. The other thing that I'll say on Scott's note is like, if the JROC, this joint council, did not enforce joint interoperability, right? So we didn't get it when the process was in place. We're not losing anything now that it's gone. And frankly, again, unless there's a carrot or a stick, unless we start schwacking program budgets that fail to meet interoperability standards, like there's no reason for the Navy to play well with the Air Force and vice versa. So like it all comes down to incentives, and the incentives aren't aligned for joint integration. And until they are, like, we're not going to get it. And the only way you enforce things in the Pentagon, to be perfectly honest, is add or remove money or rank. And that's just how it works.
Adam, August, either of you want to jump in?
Yeah, and I think one of the partial questions, like, yes, like, is it a people problem? Like, most definitely the ability to make sure that everything that you're feeding into any intelligence system, especially in discussing AI for requirements, means that, like, well, do people even agree, like, what goes into the system, right? But in the sense of, like, this question of, like, is it ready for anything? Like, again, it's like the way that we should think about software, or the modern day way that even industry thinks about software, is not necessarily how do you go from zero to the perfect solution immediately, especially for something as complex as like what JROC was intended to do, or like any of these programs that can be incredibly complex across the scale in terms of deployment. So maybe beating a dead horse here, you got to think about just like very simple systems that you can design from first principles, and then go from there that like really fits one particular mission statement, and then you prove out enough of those and you can scale it up to whatever system you wanted to.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add in, I think maybe picking up a little bit on something that August had mentioned, is we shouldn't hesitate because we feel like we don't have an answer for everything. There are clear cases throughout the process where AI and agentic can help, and we need to take those first steps. If we try to find the solutions that best fit everything, we'll end up with nothing. And that's not where our adversaries are going. Our adversaries are trying and failing and going forward. Commercial is trying and failing and moving forward. All right, some of the things we talked about, yes, coming up with requirements to implementation, validation across an entire system has a core set of challenges, a lot of human, political, and data integration challenges. We shouldn't just stop there and say, okay, we have to solve that, and ignore the fact that even down to an individual supplier who's trying to make sense of a set of requirements that come at them, and how they can better implement that and turn that faster. There's value there. Right? The gigantic backlog of DMS activities that are holding back systems from modernizing and causing those systems to wait years until they field an upgraded system. We have to address those things. We need systems, and maybe that's where it is sent out some of those multi-service needs and just get some experience. I'm a New Yorker, and we don't sit still. We got to move forward. So I'm going to advocate for taking that first step.
So Adam, I'm obligated to back up my fellow New Yorker here, being from New York myself, and maybe push back a little bit that even if the services wanted to play together, DoD has had in the past some substantial challenges in adopting technology generally, let alone something like AI, right? So let me for a moment can we take that as a premise that they want to play together nicely in the sandbox? And then let me combine the two questions we have here is, what have you all seen as far as how far along OSD has come with considering AI implementation in the mission engineering and integration activity, as well as how far along have the services come in trying to integrate AI in requirements generation? And let me add, and to the extent that more needs to be done, how do you provide those incentives to DoD and the services to really bring in AI for the requirements process? And maybe we can go in reverse order this time. Adam?
That's good, because I was chatting with the performer just last night on this exact subject. And they're not waiting. At least this one is not waiting. They're leaning forward. We don't see a lot of that. I don't see a lot of that coming down from OSD. I see discussion. I see some potential programs where this is of interest, but I don't see the awards coming down, certainly down into the space of electronic design automation. But I can certainly report out discussion with the performer that they're not waiting. They're not even waiting for us in EDA. They're getting started. They have access to LLM. They have access to specifications. They know their existing systems. They know their engineers. And they're putting together basic elements. Can we help them as an organization? Sure. But at least this one is leaning forward. And I have a feeling that that's where it's going to come up.
Thanks, Adam. August?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think if we kind of overgeneralize sort of here, the DoD, the DoD and I think in general federal government has been buying software for a long time that's been implementing what I would call like generally predictive models. And if we were talking about zeros, ones, and like just digits or just pure numbers or any other physical data that's just not requirements, it would be like, yeah, no brainer. We should figure out how to apply these things to make our processes smarter. But I think in the way that this is so human, and for the first time, we're looking at just something so subjective, and in a way, it's like neurally. So as like John Ferry would put it, like as you said, like it's sort of like so non-linear at the moment that if we continue down this path, like how can we actually get it to be more predictive in the sense that, yeah, this process really should be more linear as well. And so abstracting away from it, just making sure that you actually have the tools to inform. And I think a couple of comments have said this also in the Q&A, like the ability for AI to inform and really just augment human decision making is really the purpose of what we're building here. And I think that's hopefully the next way that people can kind of get their heads around it.
John?
Yeah, I think from the OSD level, I honestly don't know, but I think at the service, and for what it's worth, some fits and starts with the folks who may have had the ball for carrying this, right, with like CDAO and now moving that into R&E. But at the service level, I would double tap on what August said. Like, we are getting direct demand signal, particularly since ACTBot does a lot of things other than requirements, right? We do pre-award, we do kind of all those acquisition processes. The next leg in that workflow is requirements. And there is an active demand signal from our current user base to help with that requirements process, because the buyers are subtly different than the requirers and all the folks in that chain. And I'll just add to that, I briefly mentioned it earlier, net of net, the DERP fork RIF cut tens of thousands of program managers, contracting officers, contract specialists, requirements writers, and developers and their associated support staffs. So the powers that be are feeling that pressure. At the same time, the budget is going up and the number of hands to process that budget into capabilities is going down. And they know that AI is here as a force multiplier. And they've already had kind of that light taste with things like NIPR GPT, Camo GPT, right? Those GPT wrapper tools that can kind of help with like 10% of the AI enablement. They've been using it to write documents and stuff. But purpose-built capabilities are the things that they are now starting to demand. You know, August brought up the ACC CSO solicitation. Like, they know that it's out there, they want it, and they are actively procuring it to start accelerating their processes. So I think the demand signal's there, and the more importantly, the cultural orientation for adoption is 100%.
Thanks, Scott.
So I agree with John. I think lower level pieces of the services are starting to try to adopt this, but I'm going to take it back to the higher level. So I'm working with seniors in 2 different services as well as OSD. What I will tell you is those folks are looking at AI more to streamline administrative processes. How do you do travel vouchers? How do you do appraisals? You know, all the things that they consider time consuming, but it's not an acquisition world. So I am intimately familiar with B-21, Sentinel, F-47. There is 0 AI ingested into any of those major programs, 0. And part of it is they don't know how to do it. They understand it could be useful, but in these large programs, we've already talked about the complexity, they don't know how to do it without giving it everything. Or, I mean, and part of it is they don't have clean data. They don't have an ability to pull all these different systems together. But in major acquisitions, I would say right now, I have not seen AI used in any of them.
And you say that as if that's a bad thing.
Well, I don't know. I mean, this goes back to the same thing, is because I think, you know, and John brought up, you know, JCIDS 2. JCIDS 2 has 1,000 meetings, right? But interoperability is the key. What we used to start coining the phrase is the Internet of warfighting things, right? It's funny, everybody in the commercial world. So I'm curious how the commercial world did this, which is my friggin' phone can talk to my car, my refrigerator, things I never needed it to talk to. It's interoperable with everything. And in the department, nothing talks to anything else. Even an F-35 and F-22 can't talk. F-35 and legacy aircraft can't talk. I mean, AI designed without those connections and that interoperability can design something for you that may not be good. Whereas the humans actually know it. It's still kind of sub-optimized, but they have more in their brains because they trust them to tell them and in-brief them to stuff than they would just a IT system where you have to compile data your adversary may have access to. So I don't know if I don't think it's a bad thing, but I think at some point, if we don't do it, our adversaries are doing it in spades. They've done interoperability and they've done AI in ways we are impressed with. If we don't figure it out, it will cause us a problem. And kind of to John's issue on incentive structure, I agree. It's currently based on you know, promotions or money, but the incentive structure for the DoD ought to be winning the nation's wars. And I think what we will find out is if we have a major problem, it will re-incentivize them. But it shouldn't be that we have to wait till we have a major problem. And right now, we're heading that direction.
So Sam Moyer has this really intriguing question, which I think starts picking up on some of the things you're talking about with communication, which is, does AI have promise to inform requirements by pulling in additional sources of insight that DoD, I think, doesn't instinctively or reflexively consider, like more commercial market information on what's going on in commercial markets, or innovation trend data, or requirements in allied forces?
Absolutely. I think that the one thing that, and again, when you look at what, you know, whether folks have used ChatGPT or Grok or XAI, what it is it's using data from across multiple different sources and you know, depths of information in different boundaries. And what the DoD has not done is crossed boundaries to allow information pulled from sources that you might not think important. What AI does is pull data. It gives you information in seams that the human never noticed, right? Pulling all that data together can be very beneficial, but like I think Adam said, it's also very vulnerable, right? I mean, I don't know how we've figured this out yet. So you take the benefit and minimize the vulnerabilities, and that's kind of the nexus we're at right now.
So building on that, and you know, Adam, John, August, please jump in on this. So building on that, the promise of AI to inform requirements, you know, from additional sources, using commercial sources, other allied forces, what can that be adding to the whole process? And how can that enrich it?
Context
so
and information.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, where I was puzzling on is, and it was picking up on Scott's point, which is, if we're going to use that to aggregate and improve the requirements process, we're going to have to figure out an abstraction method. There's got to be a way that we can share information that abstracts, that allows a secure way of digging deeper without bringing it all together. And I'm trying to think through, and I'm just thinking and speaking at the same time. All right, so we have humans that have all and they have different levels of clearance. And we live our day and we go to our Home Depot and we segment information and we don't share. We're going to have to impart something like that to enable us to aggregate data across, because otherwise we're just drawing from a commercial space, and I'm not sure how relevant the data that ChatGPT has to getting an F-22 and F-35 to talk to each other. All right, so I'm hand waving because I don't have a good answer, but I think if we try to model it on how we compartmentalize information among humans, maybe that's going to be a path. And I'll pause.
John?
Yeah, what I'll say is that, like, ironically, if you were around, whatever, 5-7 years ago when big data was the big name and the big, buzzword, and everybody wanted the big datas and they wanted to get some magical insights out of their data because they have the big datas now. And it went nowhere, right? Because there's no useful, coherent application space for big data, right? Some ugly Kibana dashboards or whatever. Ironically, now we have a use case for big data, right? We have large sums of disparate, incoherent data all over the freaking place. Luckily, we now have application space for it, which is, generative AI is a really good use. And with, vector embeddings, KNN, bots, and now MCP servers, where you can throw an MCP server with a number of agentic agents with specified tasks, tools, and responsibilities. And then you can connect those through API routers to disparate data sources. So data can stay in rest at its resident location, and it can be contextually accessed for specific purposes from purpose-built agents. Like, that's the future, people. The problem is, and this is, I think, what a lot of what Scott and Adam were talking about, is like, we didn't do the big data stuff 5 years ago. So now all the feedstock for our AI is still in disparate, disorganized sumps all over the place. Some people have thrown a Kong router on top of some of their stuff, but God help you if you can get through the communication security and the ATO trolls to actually get connected to any of those APIs to actually access that data. So like, there's a lot of legacy cultural biases that are kneecapping this process. The technology is freaking there. It's, again, still the culture of, oh my gosh, what if my data gets compromised? Like, all of our platforms are up to NIST 853 Rev 5, or else we wouldn't be touching your data in the first place. So if you have a problem with the security standards, go blame NIST. But as long as I'm doing the cheetah flips to get my ATO, like, we should assume that it's at least minimally protected. If you want to start working into the IL6, IL7 SAPCO realm, like, there's a whole other stack of problems with multi-level security classification. And let's not even talk about named programs. Like, that's a whole other morass. And we can have an entire 3-hour conversation about how skiff trolls have captured the requirements and procurement process. That's a different conversation for a different day.
Yeah, so I frame and understand that extremely well when that security protection is within a given performer or a service or an element. But when we try to expand it across, it scares the heck out of me, right? So when I got my base classification, if I move to my next one, if that gets approved, I understand the ramifications of breaking that classification. They're real. I lose my family, I lose my career, I go to jail. How do we impose that on an agent, an AI agent? And that's where my concern is not within the scope of that cyber secure environment, but it's crossing the boundaries to have an aggregated view of a bigger data.
Yeah, and I think I agree with all the points here about security and just like making sure like, okay, well, like when is really the right time to do AI for this stuff? But I think from a more technical perspective, like one of the funniest things I remember from the early days of Palantir is like my interview question was, design a vehicle that is going to navigate its way through the Afghani desert, right, with no GPS signal. And like you need to be able to trace it from base camp. Like, how would you even be able to do that? And the goal is to not build a system on the spot. like right there. Otherwise, I'd be a genius and I should build a different company, right? But this pathway of thinking is exactly kind of like leading to my answer to your question, Moshi, which is like no one knows like what is going to be the best way for AI to do for requirements today. But when you have these very specific challenges and like what we see today with our current customers is that we'll provide one specific module that says like, hey, we just accelerated your ability to just like copy and paste historical old requirements faster. Like, go use it. A week later, they go like, hey, actually, this has been so amazing. This opened up 10 more thoughts. How do we even more closely like align ourselves to do that? And so you see an evolution in the way people are actually thinking over time, and that's actually how you're going to get the best possible answer is, yeah, you just got to start from like step by step and then see how people respond to it. And then they'll get even more creative and create new neural pathways of thinking.
So maybe we can build on that. We have, in theory, a JCIDS process that has been put to bed, and we almost have a clean sheet. We've had historically in times periods where we've done threat-based requirements. We've had a time where we've done capability-based requirements. Does AI provide another way of thinking about requirements that we're not doing now? Let me give an example. Neither threat nor capability-based requirements are truly ingesting what is capable of the defense industrial base on a sustainment level, on a capability level, on technology level, surely not on a cost level. Does implementing AI in a requirements process open up avenues of, in developing requirements, understanding what is possible in the industrial base and start making some of those trades that sometimes we just don't make? Does that make sense? And how do you build a clean sheet requirements process leveraging AI capabilities?
So Moshe, I guess I'll go I think you're back to almost the same thing because I agree with you that you do have a clean sheet, but again, to take the information you would need from multiple services and agencies to build a capability, because we don't want to build unitary systems anymore. You want to build systems where great data from space systems should be provided to any of the other systems, whether they be land or air or sea. How do you start figuring out what that is so they can pull out what is available so it can set requirements cleaner? Because it's not going to set a requirement on something that it doesn't think exists. And right now, anything it does not know about, it assumes does not exist and will base requirements around only things it knows exists within its data structure. So you're back to compiling data there.
But understand, I agree, but putting that aside, are there things that AI offers in requirements that, assuming you can get over that exchange of information hurdle, we can be thinking about and building a system to incorporate that? Like,
absolutely. I think AI could actually, you've seen some of the demos, and they're working with places that are actually sharing the data, doing what they need. You can easily grow that to a larger system. They just have to be willing to change the way they operate. But I think AI absolutely can help you build better requirements if it has all the right information.
And what are those? What are the things that capability process can do with AI that you really can't do effectively without AI? I guess that's where I'm pushing. If we're thinking of a clean sheet process, how are we thinking differently because of what?
Okay. So I would say the answer is for me, and I'm sorry, and then I'll let you, is when I dealt with the Air Force guys were wicked smart on all the Air Force capabilities, had no clue of what the space systems were, the naval systems, or anything else. So they literally are data limited themselves because they don't know how to ingest that, right? What an AI system could do is it now plays an objective agnostic player of looking at everything across all the stuff and pulling it together so that the human who doesn't have visibility outside their little stovepipe now has better visibility. I didn't know that existed. As it starts to pull in capabilities and requirements, it would ask the system, where did you get that? He will start learning more of what sister systems can give. So I think AI can do that because it'll give them information they do not currently have.
Yes, and not only will AI give you information that you traditionally will find very hard to access or just like not even aware that exists. Like honestly, a lot of this is just an awareness problem. The other thing too is that, okay, well, let's say LLMs were like, let's say OpenAI just had a terrible launch, nobody used it, and like it just didn't exist. And the way that we design software and the way we should be designing software is that we take a very close look in the day in the life of like, let's say an acquisitions officer whose job it is to write requirements. They have a system. It's not like they're just sitting down and being like, oh, requirement one, this, requirement two, this. They've set up like very specific pathways of thinking that they go like, the first step is to review XYZ documents. And then I talk with XYZ people to do that, this, and this. And if you quite literally replicate the way that they think, just in the way that you can design software around it, then that actually opens it up to think, oh, okay, now I can do this thing way faster. Now that I'm doing it way faster, does one of these steps not make sense? Or should I be adding something else, right? That's different. And so that's like why ERPs and these workflow systems have been evolving so much over time, is because that's the promise of software, right? Like, don't even think about AI. The promise of software is to make everything faster. And then that allows you to then exactly diagnose like what is possibly wrong with your process and then fix it, and or like figure out like what other things you might even want to add to increase the probability of like, because again, procurement and acquisition, the whole goal is to buy the best possible thing at the best possible price. And if you're not doing that, then ultimately you're not getting to the end result. So there's always a North Star, and you got to figure out the steps in between.
John, Adam, do you want to jump in or go to the next question?
Yeah, I'll just double tap on what August said. So exactly what he said is exactly right. And whether we do the traditional, capabilities-based assessments and AOAs and flow that in, or we do threat-based assessments, like that's a strategic level decision-making process, right? That's up at the SecDef and POTUS level, right? However they want to kick off, whether it's a QDR or, what illuminates the need for new capabilities. But in terms of the requirements process, how do we make that less terrible? August exactly called it out, is start with the process as it is. And like, okay, take the JROC out of it. Okay, that is no longer a thing. The process itself still exists, to my point earlier. Right, the way that people do their job today is a process. Define that in clear terms. Put it on the whiteboard. Have all the little blocks and lines with all the adjacent, data comes in here, the input, process, output diagram that consultants are so good at charging us lots of money for. And then from a technologist perspective, what August and I do is like, okay, well, there's a place where big data can work. So we need your data. There's a place where AI can make that less terrible. Here's a place where plain Jane automation can make this less terrible. And here is now 75 out of the 150 steps that we could just completely remove out of the process flow and crunch it all down. And because we're using technology instead of paper and pens, we can make it go much, much faster with traceability and data integration. And until you do that kind of first principles process, you're not going to know like, oh, hey, it would be really great if we could pull, commercial insights from Silicon Valley and the Gundos, so we know what the VC-backed companies are doing. Where do we get that data so that I don't have to go to Crunchbase every time I want to figure out what the new, space startup is? Oh, well, we can go and pull that data. We can pull that in over this thing called an API. But until you define what that actual like linear process is and use somebody who's smart and honest and say like, we can kill these different steps in the process, and here's the additional stuff we need to be made, more robust, we're just going to be walking around in circles, right? We're going to build platforms that don't work. We're going to start a new process that looks just like the old process. And we're going to super optimize to the old way of doing things.
Adam?
Yeah, I didn't actually have more to add on that one. I was answering one of the questions in the one of the open questions. Go ahead.
No worries. So there's a question. Have you seen any RFIs, RFPs for vendors or industry partners to help these tools research the requirements and confirm technical data? We'll take that as a no.
I'm actually not sure what the...
I have not.
Yeah, and I've seen RFIs and RFPs that more or less use the AI shaker. So somewhere they feel like there's an obligation to say AI in the RFI, but it doesn't have a context of what we're describing here. So where does it have a material impact to the goal of the RFI? It just says, if you're going to build this system, are you going to use AI techniques? Which not even sure how that's a helpful stage.
Okay. So we've been talking a lot about the promise of AI, right? What would industry need to know about, putting aside the sharing of the data, we talked about that, about DoD's culture, about their requirements process and acquisition processes generally, if they try to work with DoD in AI for requirements, or what that an AI-enabled requirements process, what impact that would have on industry?
So I'm gonna jump in because this is the connection we have in our space with some of the other mission critical applications, automotive, medical, industrial, where they have some of the longevity requirements, some of the concerns about security and assurance. I think what we need the commercial industry to understand and help define are the layers of security, and it's a going both ways, right? So I think in our space we need to be able to better articulate what can hide in plain sight and what becomes specialized, unique, classified information, and define those layers in a way that we can support some of the big data, some of the data sharing things that we've discussed. But I think if we have that open conversation with how automotive deals with its supply chain, if medical deals with it, we may be able to find insights that can help inform us, and then the infrastructure that can make us successful. We'll have unique capabilities for sure, but the more that we can get those industries to kind of think in a defense kind of way, I think the better off we are.
Yeah, and Moshe, I'll add to it, which is, I think the biggest thing that industry, whether it's defense industry or commercial, is going to struggle with the department is you want to be working with an informed consumer. If you're building a fighter jet, you can find 1,000 guys who understand what that war fight looks like and engagements. They've been doing it forever. Same with ships, same with land. How many people do you think in the Department of Defense are AI experts?
7.
Oh, that's more than I thought. And so what you have is you don't have an informed consumer to work with industry on a pullover. Now, you do have some of the industry who doesn't understand all the warfighting needs, but you don't have anybody in the department who understands what it can do for them and how they can pull it over. There is just not enough expertise inside the department.
Yeah, and I'm gonna second that. I know we're in AI. I'm gonna kind of expand that. I think that there's a lot that we would need to do as on the maybe commercial side or on the informed defense side to educate program managers, requirements authors, things like that. We've been doing some of that just on the design automation to explain where they are. We had a program where the chief engineer on the program came out, saw what commercial was doing, and came back and declared we're 20 years behind. And so we've been investing in trying to provide education and provide awareness, but I think that's on all of our shoulders to do so.
Great. So in our last 2 minutes lightning round, John, in 2 years, will we have AI-enabled requirements process in the services and DoD?
Yes.
August. Same question.
Yes, as well.
Adam.
No.
Scott.
I'm going to do a tweener. Yes, but it will be a novelty and not a core capability of the department.
Interesting. Okay. 2 more quick questions, starting with you, Scott. Will they will they figure out that nut of data sharing to leverage AI as it needs to be done properly?
I think yes. Over the next 2 years, they are talking about it now. They recognize it is a must. They're working their way through it.
Adam, same question.
I struggle with it. I think at the individual supplier level and the requirements they have, yes. But gross to program, I think it's going to be a work in progress.
August.
Yes, I feel like I've seen enough whiteboards about data models to be confident that they can figure it out.
John.
Yeah, I say yes, and also there's senior leader buy-in at the multi-star level saying thou shalt go do, and there's a reciprocal demand signal at the program office level that like they got to do this or die. So like they're gonna like I said, they're gonna figure it out. Yeah.
last question. So if they incorporate AI and if they figure out the data exchange challenges, will we see substantially better and more cost-effective requirements in 2 years? John?
Yeah, obviously.
August?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes, that's an obvious. Yeah.
Yes, but not immediately. I think you're going to see this curve where you'll start to see minor improvements, but over time, I don't think it's 2 years, you will see major improvements.
Okay, so we recorded this 2 years from today. We're back. We'll replay the tape and see where you guys all were on those questions. How's that sound?
Excellent.
Sounds
Do it 1
great.
year from now, Moshe.
Great. So I know we went 2 minutes over. I apologize. We were told 3:25, but thank you really for a great conversation. Really appreciate it. And thank you everybody for joining our conversation and asking the questions. They were great questions. And
Thanks, Moshe.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right,
All right.
thanks all.
Hey, thanks, Moshe, and all the panelists for a great discussion. Moshe, sorry we didn't listen to you on the Hill, but you're actually a really good game show host. Maybe we should have used you in that role instead. So we'll think about that for the future. That was a great panel. It's actually both a combination of the theory of requirements and how we can fix them, but then the practical side of, look, these tools can make this really, really important job go a lot better, and I really appreciate you all getting into that discussion. Also, for the demo side of it, for the lightning talks, a lot of times these acquisition reform discussions are just so abstract. So the lightning talks, the demonstration of the capability, you guys showing off that you're actually already providing some of these services to willing parts of the department, it's really helpful for this audience. I really appreciate that, and I want to thank the audience for sticking with this. It was very entertaining, so it wasn't hard to stick with, but also giving us all these great questions. We hope to keep following up in this area, maybe some more work with MITRE, and if you've got ideas on other things we can do in this space, please email us at eti@ndia.org. This webinar is not the only thing we do, so please join us again for future ETI events. I just want to tell you about a couple. On November 4th, we're going to be hosting an event on mission critical connectivity sponsored by Globalstar. It's going to explore the expanding role of commercial SATCOM in defense missions. That's on November 4th at 1 o'clock. On November 12th, please join us for our next Tech 101 webinar. It's on defense energetic materials, featuring Dr. Marcus Jones of the Energetics Technology Center. The sessions covers revitalizing the energetic industrial base, looks at next-gen compounds like CL20 and government efforts to strengthen supply chains, and gives you almost a high school science lesson on what energetic materials are. Both of these sessions are free for NDIA members. You can register using the QR code on the slide or in the links that we're putting into the chat. Once again, thanks to all our panelists, speakers, and lightning talks. Thanks again for joining us today, and have a great day.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you.